today we're going to be talking about the evolution. It's not on the right slide. Okay, there you go. Yeah, I'll start over again. We're going to be talking about the evolution of the sharing economy. So we'll go through a few different phases of what I see the sharing economy being over time, where we're at now, and where I believe we're going, which offers a little bit of hope. Oh, this thing is tricky. Maybe it's better. Yeah, let's do that. Okay, so let's start off with some of my experiences with the sharing economy. So about 7 years ago, I decided that strangers weren't so different than friends, and I started experimenting what was barely called the sharing economy, but there were a few references to it online. And I started sharing my apartment in San Francisco and my car with people on Twitter, random strangers. And I eventually ended up writing a book titled It's a Shareable Life, which is a practical guide to the sharing economy, showing people how they could apply the sharing economy to their life in terms of their home and creativity and work and things of that nature. And then this is me pretending to work on a beach. No one actually works on a beach, but it's a fun idea. So in writing the book, we had to decide, what is the sharing economy? So what we came to is that the sharing economy is the utilization of an underutilized resource with a peer-to-peer exchange, meaning person to person, with the ability to save or make money and enabled by digital trust networks. So essentially, strangers could do business with one another or commerce with one another or exchange value. It's as simple as that, utilizing the internet. So sharing 1.0, we're going to go through a few different phases. Sharing 1.0 is a mapping of networks and data to information and things. So this is Craigslist in the United States. This is one of the largest classified services and heavily trafficked. And as you can see, every single one of these categories, from ride sharing to home sharing to freelancer networks, turned into their own companies and startups, many of which became large companies. So at this point, it was about strangers uniting. The sharing of data is where we started, eventually sharing files through things like BitTorrents, eventually sharing personal information, so things like LinkedIn. Originally, it was kind of crazy to think about putting where you work on a website. Eventually sharing physical objects like books and CDs by mail. I know we don't really have those much anymore. And then sharing and transacting with physical stuff, moving into time. And then sharing of homes, like I showed you my apartment earlier. So I had over 50 people sleep about 50 feet away from me, complete strangers, which, by the way, I vetted. But it's interesting how sharing has morphed over time and how we've become comfortable, and it's even become normal to hop in a stranger's car through things like Uber. So sharing 2.0, this is more of a cultural and thematic shift. This is where I got really excited about the sharing economy and thought, wow, this is about human connection and individuals transacting with value one-to-one. And maybe it sort of led me to believe that maybe at one point we wouldn't even need money at all. We could just transact with value. So I saw the seeds of cyber socialism and things like, yeah, this is a couch surfing picture. So this is me. I was creating a documentary in the early days on couch surfing with a few other individuals, and this is in Paris. So yeah, things like couch surfing and free cycle and time banking. So the exchange of value without necessarily the need for the intermediary of money. I saw this as a relationship builder and a serendipity engine. So the ability to be anywhere in the world and meet people and have these wild experiences where you're connecting through a thing, but then that thing becomes a relationship. So here's some examples. Mostly in this phase, it was grassroots and local, community-driven, but also global, which was the major thing. So sharing 2.5, this is where I would say we're at now. And this is kind of a little bit of a sad thing because There's, a move towards the gig economy and more towards automation, less focus on humans and more focus on efficiency. I'll get into a little bit later where I think we can go with this, tying all of these things together and sharing 3.0. But one of the things that I think is more marked about this time period is that it's the use of citizen assets and time in the valuation of these platforms like Airbnb and Uber, and even Facebook for that matter. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. So yeah, moving from the sharing economy to a gig economy where people's labor is, at least in the United States, considered in a contract sense, so they don't have the labor protections or the insurances provided by actually being an employee. And then we're moving eventually more into a more automated economy where, we have self-driving cars and more robotics and AI, which I know we're touching on a lot here today. So yeah, this is centralized platform dominance. 77% of searches happen through one search engine. That gives you an idea of where we're at the moment. Mass global expansion, huge capital influx. This has been massive over the last 5 years. You're seeing IPOs and private equity getting into the mix. And then in San Francisco, you have this idea of luxury as a service, so people don't actually do their own laundry or cook their own food or drive their own cars anymore. They have these things either delivered or showing up at their doorstep. So these are algorithm-based incentives, focus on money and efficiency, less focus on the human interactions and the one-to-one connections. Sort of like getting people out of the way in the apps. In the beginning, people were at the front, so when you landed on Airbnb, you saw someone's profile and you could look into who they were, and that was more important than their house. Now that's not so much the case. I would say this is a race to the bottom, and again, moving more towards automation. So right after writing It's a Shareable Life, I had to ask myself, is this really sharing? And I'll show you a few different ways where the gig economy and where we're at this very moment, I believe, is not the sharing economy, but how we can actually transmute this into something that moves us back more into real sharing. So this is just showing that drivers are essentially making less than minimum wage. And Uber, a couple of months ago, had their IPO. Travis stood to make... one of the founders, stood to make billions of dollars. Meanwhile, drivers barely got anything for, driving 10,000 rides and using their own cars and making very little money over time. And this is just showing another example of Instacart actually using tips for pay of their drivers and their delivery people. Yeah, and Airbnb, as sad as it is, actually reduces the amount of housing on the market and increases housing prices. They've proven that now. That's been a debate for a long time. So Sarah Kessler, she says the same things I'm saying in her book, Gigged. She says, it's increased risk, lack of stability, and diminishing workers' rights for gig economy workers. So this is the part I'm really excited about. This is sharing 3.0, so get the 2.5 less human thing out of your brain. So this is the remapping of money, value, and incentives. It moves us back through all of the phases, which will include efficiency, more human connection, the ability to get things done faster, and to distribute value where value is created, which I think is one of the more meaningful aspects of where we can actually go with the sharing economy and value. So I created this chart on a plane to Slovenia a few years ago. I had this download about what blockchain actually was. And so this is the idea of moving from B2B and B2C to C2C and C2B. So meaning peer-to-peer connections. And then moving more towards decentralized networks with peer-to-peer connections. And then eventually moving towards kind of more like an amorphous network, or not even a network necessarily, something like we can't even imagine yet, where connections are just made. So to ground that a little bit, let's use the taxi and Uber example. So taxi is, they pick you up, it's B2C. Uber is peer-to-peer, so it's more consumer to consumer. And then Ernst & Young started a blockchain-enabled fleet of electric cars that actually share insurance and costs of gas and all of the things, and everything's tracked and transparent. So that's more of an example of a decentralized C2C network. And then, pure C2C, it just doesn't exist yet, but we're moving there. So during all these adventures in the sharing economy, I've had a few different light bulb moments and lessons that I've derived, and I think that a few trends that I can point to. So the value of data, time, content, and assets at scale are more valuable than the technology that enables their distribution. What does this mean? It means that hosts, houses, people's content on Facebook, drivers in their cars are actually the ones creating the value on these platforms. Like they are the platform. The humans are the platform, especially when they're using their own assets. So Uber asks drivers to use their own cars, and yet is the biggest taxi company in the world. Airbnb relies on the real estate of hosts, and yet they tout themselves as the top hotel brand. And Facebook produces content through its users and is one of the largest media outlets. So that just gives you an example and grounding of where we're going and where we could go. So this is a calculator by Datum that just shows you the value of your data. This is an example, pre-search of a blockchain company that's actually paying people to search and creating a more private search engine. And Facebook, as many of you know, just started, or at least just announced their own cryptocurrency and bank to bank the unbanked. Originally, they were talking about compensating people for producing content and for their data, and I think they'll eventually do that, but this is the first step. So light bulb number 2, this is the thing I get really excited about. Value creators, hosts, drivers, and content creators should have ownership in the platforms and the ecosystems that they help generate through their efforts. So instead of just, paying people more in fees and less in transaction fees, what I'm actually saying here is that they should have equity in the platforms themselves. So that if there's an IPO or there's something that happens at some phase, they actually get the long-term compensation. And this is going to be more and more and more important as greater centralization happens and more automation occurs. Kevin Kelly agrees. He says the new methods of equity and sharing would unleash tens and thousands of innovative businesses that could not have been born otherwise. The sharing economy would now include ownership sharing. That's a great book, by the way. And Airbnb is in the mix on this too. I've been saying this for years. I'm like, Airbnb should really be giving their hosts equity. And finally, they're talking to the SEC about actually doing this. They're doing it a bit under the radar. Most people don't know about it, but they've filed some stuff with the SEC to say that they want their stakeholders to be in alignment, meaning also their hosts. Light bulb number 3, if we can tie value and incentives together, we could fundamentally program technology with our values. So what does this mean? It means that with blockchain and with creating currencies, that we could actually fundamentally, say you're running a city and you want people to recycle and vote and participate in civic efforts. If you're constantly compensating people for doing the right things and completing the right actions that actually promote a greater wellness in society, we all benefit. So this is a sort of thinking about sharing as a circle versus a line, in my opinion. And last but not least, this might sound a bit out there, but I believe that money is only needed to match wants with needs. And in a perfect economy, it's perhaps not even needed. And this guy, Stefan Hedenrich, agrees. He says, one purpose of money is to distribute goods and labor. In the future, we'll be able to solve these tasks differently without money, instead relying on the help of networks, algorithms, and artificial intelligence. That's moving more towards the pure C2C. So what are the principles of the sharing economy 3.0? Shared ownership over access, trust over fear, value distribution over profit, replicability over scalability, meaning that you could have federated cooperatives over centralized dominance worldwide, ecosystem over independence, crowd over individualism, and alignment over control, and more locally based over global. That doesn't mean that the local networks are not connected globally. So this is a convent from the 1300s that myself and a couple of partners have put together in Italy, about an hour north of Rome. We have a monastery from the 1300s where we're hosting co-creation castle and all sorts of innovation events and really embodying the elements of sharing and the sharing economy 3.0. So we have a program running from June through through mid-August. If you're interested, please find me and I'll tell you more about it. And feel free to get in touch. I'm excited to be here with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chelsea. Does somebody have questions? Des questions pour Chelsea sur l'économie de partage? Vaste sujet. Okay.
None? We've got
Sure.
one.
Oh, we got one question.
I love questions.
So I really liked your speech, so thank you for that.
Thank you very much.
What do you think is the next big thing when it comes to sharing? So cars, homes. Do you have a market or domain where you think it hasn't been exploited yet as much as it could be?
I don't love the word exploited, but I think two things. One is that the sharing of equity is definitely coming. It's coming from the outside in and the inside out, which will fundamentally change the way the economy works overall, not just the sharing economy. We'll start thinking about what is value, where is it created, and how can we distribute it. And underrepresented groups like the elderly and aging populations, I think, are currently underserved because the Silicon Valley thinks a lot about themselves. They don't really think about, people outside of their realm, and that's where a lot of the technology has been centralized. Although that's completely changing worldwide. That mentality is seeded all over the place now, and I think that's changing as well.
Quelqu'un d'autre? Okay.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Chelsea.